My name is Julian Cross. I'm 35 years old, and when I was 25, I learned the kind of betrayal that doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors, just quiet paperwork and a bank account drained by the woman who raised me. I didn't find out in some explosive argument. I found out while trying to pay for grad school, tuition denied, check bounced, and an inheritance account that was gone. My father had left it to me, when he passed, $78,000 in a trust with my name on it. But when I called the bank, they said it had been consolidated by my mother. When I confronted her, she barely flinched. "Julian," she said, like I was a child asking for candy, "you were going to waste it. That money would have disappeared into some startup or a useless art degree." I protected it. I stood there stunned. My father had trusted her to hold that money for me until I was old enough. And when the time came, she decided she knew better. She used it, all of it, paid off the mortgage, took a luxury cruise, remodeled the kitchen. "One day you'll understand," she said. But I already understood. She didn't believe in me. She never did. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I packed my things that night and left her house without saying goodbye. That was the last day I called her Mom. From that point on, she was just the woman who taught me a lesson no business school ever could. Betrayal doesn't always wear a villain's mask. Sometimes it smiles as it robs you blind. I moved into a tiny room in a shared apartment above a mechanic shop. My dreams of grad school dissolved overnight, but something else took their place. A quiet, focused hunger. I worked at a tech repair shop by day and learned everything I could about real estate finance at night. I studied algorithms, market trends, and how to make money talk. Because if I couldn't reclaim what was mine, I'd build something bigger. I promised myself I'd never ask for help again. Not from family, not from anyone. For years, I kept my head down. Built a small consulting gig into a six-figure firm. Invested early in undervalued neighborhoods no one was paying attention to. I watched as houses people laughed at became cornerstones of entire redevelopments. I never wore designer suits. I didn't flash cash, I just played the long game. While she kept living in the house my father left behind, completely unaware that one day the deed would pass through my hands. And 10 years later, it did. When her health dipped, and she quietly sold the house to cover her new downsizing plans, she didn't realize who her buyer was. Not until she signed the papers and saw the name at the bottom. Mine. She didn't recognize the name at first. It had been 10 years, and I no longer went by the boyish version she used to call me. I signed the purchase documents under my full legal name, Julian T. Cross Holdings LLC. Clean, professional, unemotional, just like the contracts I'd learned to master. It wasn't until her realtor mentioned the buyer would be stopping by for a walkthrough that she asked for a name. When he told her, he said she went completely still, like someone just replayed a nightmare they thought they buried. The house meant everything to her. Not because it was a mansion, but because it was her last standing trophy. The one thing she believed she controlled. My father had paid it off before he passed, and she had gutted it in her own image with my inheritance. New floors, new fixtures, a fresh paint job every 5 years. What she didn't know was that the same neighborhood she once bragged about had quietly turned into a gold mine, and the value had tripled. And I'd been waiting, watching, until the right moment arrived. When I stepped back onto the porch for the first time in a decade, I didn't knock, I waited. I wanted her to open that door, not because she was expecting me, but because she never imagined I'd return as anything but the son she discarded. The door creaked open slowly, and there she was, same polished nails, same expensive perfume. But this time she wasn't in control. She blinked hard, like the sun had just exposed something she wasn't ready to see. "Julian," she said, voice cracking. "You? What are you doing here?" I smiled, calm and measured. "Just here to look at the place," I said. "I heard the new owner might be stopping by." Her lips parted, confusion clouding every word. "But the papers?" "Yeah," I said, pulling the final contract from my coat. "That was me." I handed it to her, and for a moment I saw her hand tremble. She stared at the document, eyes scanning my name again and again, like reading it slower would change what it meant. "You bought the house?" she whispered. "No," I replied quietly. "I reclaimed what was stolen." There was no raised voice, no dramatic speech, just the weight of the truth sitting between us like a silent verdict. She wanted to say something, anything, but nothing she could say would make it untrue. I walked past her into the hallway, the one where my childhood photos once hung. She'd taken them down. Probably years ago. The frames were replaced with bland modern art and abstract prints she thought screamed sophistication. But to me it screamed erasure. She hadn't just spent my money. She'd tried to erase the boy who once lived here. Now the man stood in his place, and every inch of this house was mine. She followed me through the house, like a ghost chasing something already lost. Her heels clicked on the hardwood she once bragged about. The floors, she said, were too nice for a reckless son who'd only track in mud. Now she walked behind me in silence, too proud to beg, too shaken to speak. I took my time, not out of cruelty, but because I needed to see it one last time. The kitchen where she told me I was a disappointment. The living room where she opened my father's will and promised to protect what he left me. I stopped in front of the fireplace. She stood behind me, arms crossed, trying to compose herself. "You had no right," she said finally. Her voice was tight, like she'd rehearsed that line for days. "No right to ambush me like this." I turned slowly and looked her in the eyes. "Like you had no right to spend my future behind my back," I said it calmly, every syllable sharpened by years of discipline. "You didn't just take money, you took my voice. You decided I'd fail before I even tried." She scoffed. "I was protecting you." But the words hung in the air like smoke from an old fire. No one believed in anymore. I stepped past her into the study, the one she converted into a reading room. After she cleared out my father's desk, she'd replaced every trace of him with glossy magazines and crystal bowls. But I knew the foundation. I knew the bones of this house better than she did. And now, legally, I knew every beam, every document, every title, and her signature was the one that made it mine. "I'm not kicking you out," I said. "You have 60 days. That's more than you gave me when you emptied that trust." She looked like she wanted to argue, to explode, to shatter the air with blame and history and guilt. But I didn't give her the space. I kept walking. "You always said I'd waste it," I added. "But what I built, it's clean, it's legal, and it didn't cost anyone their dignity, except maybe yours." She followed me to the door now. Her posture wasn't proud anymore. It was quiet, uncertain. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back?" I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "Because you taught me that silence is power," I said. "And I wanted you to see what it looks like when the son you gave up on learns to own everything you thought he'd lose." I left her standing in the doorway, stunned, silent, the house echoing with everything she never said and everything I didn't need to anymore. The story could have ended there, with me reclaiming the house and walking away clean. But life doesn't tie itself up in neat bows, especially when pride is bruised. 2 weeks after I served her formal notice, she called. For the first time in nearly a decade, the number flashed on my screen like a test. I answered without hesitation, not because I owed her anything, but because I wasn't the scared boy she left behind. Her voice cracked like old porcelain. "Julian, I don't understand how you did all this." I let the silence stretch. She wasn't asking about logistics. She was asking how the son she dismissed became the man who now held the keys. "I paid attention," I said, "to you, to every mistake, to every time you told me I couldn't. I built something from that." She didn't argue. This time she just listened, the first real act of humility I'd ever heard from her. A week later, her lawyer contacted me with an offer. She wanted to lease back the house. At market rate. No plea, no discount, just a formal request. I reviewed it once, twice, then declined, not out of spite, but because history lives in walls, and I wasn't about to let the past set up camp in my future. I had other plans. That house, the one she gutted, the one built on money she stole, was going to be turned into a community equity workspace for young entrepreneurs, people like me who were told they'd never make it. When I held the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I didn't invite her, but she came anyway. Stood across the street with sunglasses on, like a stranger watching someone else's celebration. She didn't step forward, she didn't speak. But I saw her, and for once she looked small, not because she was weak, but because she had finally run out of stories to tell herself. The boy she tried to erase was now building futures for others, inside the very walls she once used to control him. Later that night I found a note slip through the mail slot. No envelope, just a torn piece of paper with 6 words in shaky cursive. "I never thought you'd do it." I folded the note in half and slid it into a drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of how far silence can carry you when you let actions speak where words once failed. A month after the grand opening, I walked into the old house-turned-startup hub and watched 12 young founders work late into the night. Their laptops glowed, their whiteboards were cluttered with ideas, and their eyes carried the same fire I once had when the world told me I wasn't ready. I didn't tell them where the money came from. I didn't tell them whose house this once was, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting legacy on my own terms. But word gets around, even when you don't speak. My mother's friends began asking questions about how she lost the house, about how her son was suddenly in real estate journals and finance panels. She told them I took it, that I manipulated her. But the paperwork told another story, and soon silence worked against her, the way she once used it against me. She could no longer control the narrative, because I never had to defend mine. It was built-in proof. A mutual friend reached out, someone from my father's side, someone who remembered the original trust. He asked to meet. We sat in a coffee shop near the coast, and he pulled out a faded copy of the original estate letter. "Your father," he said, "believed in you more than she ever did." He paused. "You know, he didn't want her to control it after he passed. But she convinced the court." I nodded slowly. "I know," I replied. "But I got it back. Not the money, the power to decide what it means." That night, I walked through the old study again. The place where she once erased my father's desk was now a mentorship space. The walls were lined with books I'd handpicked. On the shelf sat one framed photo, my father holding me at age 6, with that same quiet pride in his eyes. I never displayed it for sentiment. I displayed it as truth. For anyone wondering where I came from, it wasn't her permission, it was his belief. She never reached out again after the note. Maybe she thought I'd return to her once I'd proven something, but I didn't. I didn't need her to acknowledge me. Because the moment she was forced to walk past a building with my name on the plaque, the justice had already been served. She got to see what her absence built, and that was enough. I no longer carried her rejection like a wound. It became fuel, refined, clean, and untouchable. And justice, it didn't come through courtrooms or confrontations. It came through a single truth: she underestimated me. and I used the silence she left behind to become undeniable. It's been 3 years since that day she sold me the house. The house that once held my silence now holds purpose, impact, and a future no one can take. I visit sometimes on Sunday evenings, not to supervise, not to hold on, but to remember the space has changed. New paint, new voices, a new heartbeat. But there's a quiet corner upstairs where sunlight pours in just right, where I sometimes sit with my coffee and realize I feel nothing when I think of her now. That's the real victory, isn't it? Not the money, not the title, not even the house. It's reaching the point where you no longer ache for an apology. You no longer hope for recognition. You stop carrying the old hurt like a badge and start living as someone who has outgrown the need to prove anything at all. What I needed wasn't justice, I needed freedom. And in building that freedom brick by brick, I became the kind of man my younger self would have followed, with pride. The last time I saw her was by chance. I was speaking at a community event downtown, sharing the stage with entrepreneurs I once mentored. Afterward, as I stepped off stage, I spotted her in the back row, no spotlight, no confrontation, just a silent woman with folded hands and tired eyes, sitting alone. She didn't approach me, and I didn't go to her. We didn't need words. I had already said everything that needed saying, through actions, not speeches. I never went back to the house she moved into after the sale. I don't know if she tells people who I am. I don't care if she does, because the version of me she created, the reckless boy, the disappointment, the one not worth investing in, he doesn't exist anymore, and the man who replaced him, he owes her nothing, not even resentment. Now I build futures, quietly, strategically, for people who remind me of who I used to be, underestimated, overlooked, but not defeated. Every time I hand over a business grant or sign off on a new mentorship application, I think, this is what she thought I'd never do. And still I do it, over and over again. So if you've ever been cast aside, told you weren't ready, made to feel small by the very people who should have lifted you, remember this: you don't need their permission to become who you were meant to be. You just need time, patience, and the courage to keep going when no one claps. Because someday they'll walk through a door they once slammed shut and realize they don't belong in the room anymore. If you've made it this far, drop a day in the comments and share this with someone who's rising in silence. And remember, you owe your past nothing, but you owe your future everything.